Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Agile Bob. Thank you again for coming over and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Vince. So, all right, so I have to ask the question, who here is not from Ultimate Software? Do we have like more than 10 of you? Okay, good. All right. Last time I was here, Rick, didn't we have like all the Ultimate people sitting over there because like they had the cheap seats or something? Right? So I'm happy to be here again. It's kind of funny, you have Kenny Rubin talking to you on Thursday, and both of us are from Colorado, and we're meeting here tomorrow night to talk because we can never get to the same schedule in Colorado. My talk tonight is on a topic that I like to talk about because it's about how to get better. It's about the 7 disciplines that I find in high-performing Agile teams. And not all teams have all of these disciplines. Teams do other things as well as these. But I want to give you some starting points for your journey. And a lot of people from Ultimate will probably see these slides and say, we're doing that, we're doing that, we're doing that. And if you're in that situation, my challenge to you is, how do you do that even better? Because as you heard earlier, Ultimate is doing it well. They've been doing it for 10 years now. But even they recognize they're not at the pinnacle yet. And by the way, unlike every mountain in the US and in the world, there is no pinnacle for Agile, right? Nobody's been there yet. When you reach the mountaintop, you realize, oh, damn, that mountain's a lot higher than I thought, and there's another top up there, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. How can you reach your first mountaintop? How can you get there? And I want to start out by talking about, why do Scrum projects fail? I took this from the version 1 State of Agile survey that gets published every year. And when you look at this chart, some things stand out. Philosophy and culture, pressure, communication, lack of experience. When you look at this, what you find out is all of these things add up to about 43% of failures are due to people problems. Right, it's the people, not the system. And the people need significant help to make Scrum work. One of the things I talk about in my classes excessively is I mention the fact that doing Scrum is the easy part. Thinking in an Agile way is the hard part. And that's where all the people factors come in. Thinking, philosophy and culture. Thinking, pressure. Thinking, communications. Culture, unwillingness, lack of support. Those are things that are about the way we think. And we have to do that a lot differently in an Agile world. Now, why do we forget people? Well, it starts out from the very start. The description on the Scrum Alliance website used to say, Scrum is teams, artifacts, time boxes, and rules. Right? It doesn't say anything about thinking up there, does it? Right? And then Scrum is an innovative approach to getting work done. Still doesn't talk about people. And here's something interesting. I like to make a lot of provocative statements in my classes before I explain them. So I'll give you one here tonight. I don't believe anyone should be paid for working. I don't believe you should ever get paid for the work you do. What should you get paid for? The value you help deliver. Do any of these talk about value? No. We're led down the wrong path right from the start. And by the way, is it easy to work really hard and not deliver anything of value? Yeah, and your companies do it all the time, even here, right? We want to make sure we're not doing that, and high-performing teams try to get around that. We need to understand it's about creating value, and 2 things about creating value are really important to understand. Number 1, you can never create value by yourself. You don't have enough skill to create value on your own. You need others helping you. I don't care how good a developer you are, your company's not going to ship something that you created and tested. Right? Somebody else is going to have to test it. So we have to understand it's about working together. Second thing about value you have to understand is, who is the value for? Who are you trying to create value for? Your customer. Unless you're an internal IT shop, does your customer ever live in your building? No. And in fact, I like to use this phrase for product managers, product owners. The answer is never inside the 4 walls where you are. It's always outside those 4 walls. And it's kind of interesting because surveys say over 50% of product owners never talk to anyone outside their building. How can you be a product owner and not talk to the people out there that you're trying to serve? Right? And so part of this is about saying, let's think in an Agile way, part of Agile is satisfying the customer. Doesn't it make sense to talk to them? Right? That's some of the things we have to do. Another thing, nothing about human nature in here. Right? Human nature says, I want to work hard. Well, Scrum says, do that in the context of delivering value. And yet sometimes we're not able to deliver value because our company is so dysfunctional. So what do? We work harder. We try to make ourselves feel better. That doesn't help the client get a product, does it? Right? So those are the kinds of things we have to keep into account. And let's look at the first book about Scrum. This was the cover of that very first book. And on it, there's a little exercise here. Who wants to be volunteer to help me with the exercise? Come on, somebody raise your hand. Okay, what's your name?
Brendan.
Brendan, can you see what's written up here?
I can.
You can. So from this word down to this word, please read it as quickly as you can.
Red, yellow, green, blue, red, blue, yellow, brown, green, blue.
Okay. I'll tilt the screen a little towards you. All right, very good. Now, who's more in the center of the room? Somebody out this section. Who else wants to volunteer for me? Come on, give me another one. Anna, right?
Anna, yes.
Anna, so I want you this time, instead of reading the words, very quickly tell me what color the words are. So go ahead, very quickly.
Blue, green, red, yellow, green, red, blue, red, yellow.
Right, so think about it. When your mind sees words, what does it want to do?
Say the word.
It wants to say the words. It was very hard to multitask and make that happen. It shows something about human nature right on the cover, right? How many of you in your jobs do your companies consider multitasking a good thing, right? It turns out it's a very negative thing, and you just saw it. How much did Anna slow down just by trying to say colors instead of words, right? And I have a lot of them like this. You slow down a tremendous amount when you don't have focus, and that's human nature. We have to take that into account when we're talking about high-performing teams. This book also has a section on Scrum values. And I want to quickly cover what those are because I think they're really important as success factors for all of us. So I'm going to put a picture up here. That book had, in the appendix, they listed 5 Scrum values. And the first one they listed was the value of commitment. And that word has struck more fear into the hearts of more people than any word I could think of in the human language, right? What it means in this context is committing to each other to do your best. That's fairly straightforward. On your teams, commit to doing your best work. And they also talk about making commitments to your organization, but your organization making commitments back to you. Right? It's okay to make a commitment to your organization if they're going to make a commitment back. And the commitment they're going to make back is to allow you to focus. Right? If you make a commitment and you're not allowed to focus, what chance do you have? Not really much. So you make a commitment, they make a commitment to allow you to focus. They said another thing that would be great for Agile teams and Scrum teams is openness, transparency. Right? A little experiment. Who here is a developer or has been in one in the past? Okay, so let's pick what's your name here in the tan shirt?
James.
James. So James, I'm going to give you a little test. Imagine for a moment you're an average developer and not the awesome developer I know you are. Okay? He's awesome because he's here, right? So James, halfway through the project, I come to you as your project manager and I say, James, we're halfway done with this project and I need to know what % complete you are. What would the average person respond to that? Halfway through, what would they say? 50%. He doesn't even know what project we're talking about, but he's 50%. And that happens all the time. Are we being very honest at that point? No. We're trying to rationalize that that's the right answer. We might say things like, well, I could say I'm 50% done. I'll just work this weekend to make it up. Well, yeah, that little bit ain't going to get you close either. But openness is about saying, we're going to be honest with where we really are. And why do we not do that today? Repercussions. Because there's no respect. And so we're going to try to have a respectful relationship. We're going to have a respect-filled relationship that says it's okay to be open and honest. There aren't repercussions, there's help, right? So I like to do a little bit that I call my good manager, bad manager bit. And let's see, who do I want to pick on? David, here in the second row. So David, imagine for a moment that I'm your manager, and you say, hey Bob, we're halfway through, but I'm only 25% of the way done. Bad manager looks at David and says, David, that's horrible. I need you to figure that out. How are you going to catch up? What are you going to do? I'm putting all the pressure on David, right? And by the way, if he knew what to do, wouldn't he have already done it? Right? Because we always hire dumb people, right? No, we hire smart people. So David's at a loss when I've given him bad manager. Good manager says, David, I respect you. I know you're a hard worker. You're behind. We need to catch up. What can we do to help with this problem? Good manager says, it's all of our problem, not your problem. And by the way, I'm here to help, not hurt. Right? So there has to be openness, and that requires there to be respect. And does anybody remember, the toughest value of all, does anybody remember what Cowardly Lion wanted?
Courage.
Yeah, I put a heart up there just so some people would say heart, so those of you that did, thank you. But he wanted courage. And courage is the hardest value of all. Who has the courage to say, that's not the way we do things? Who has the courage to say, well, in fact, I've got a little helper here. Who has the courage to say, no! Right? If we can't use this button, we're in big trouble. Right? Because what happens if you say yes all the time? What happens to your projects? They go out of control, right? So you have to be able to say no, and that's my favorite one, the no, right? So we have to be able to say no, and that takes a lot of courage. Now, so far I haven't really talked about disciplines of high-performing teams. I'm just still setting us up for that. But this is a big part of it. This is how we think a little bit differently. It's okay to make commitments when we have focus. It's okay to be open if there's respect. And it's okay to be courageous. In fact, what I find is high-performing teams always have a great deal of courage. They have to. Because they have to stand up for themselves. You can't be a high-performing team if you can't stand up for yourself. You'll just get run over. Okay? So let's move on. Think about what caused Agile to take off. Very start of the Agile Manifesto. Through this work, we have come to value. Values. Same word we used up here. Values. Right? It's about the way we think. That's the really important part. These 17 people said it first, but it's still there. Now, what's interesting is, you probably haven't read the Agile Manifesto in a while. Individuals' interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, all that stuff. I read this for the very first time in 2001, shortly after it came out. And I was the VP of development for a company. And I thought to myself, wow, what a bunch of whiny programmers wrote this crap. Doesn't it sound like a whiny programmer, right? Working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, duh, they don't write any documentation anyway. Responding to change or following a plan? When was the last time they gave me a plan, right? Now, we're 17 years, we're what, 15 years later almost, 14 years later, and I now know 10 of these people. They're literally in my phone. I could call them right now. They would answer and know it was me. And what I know now is they're not a bunch of whiny programmers. They're a bunch of whiny old programmers now. But what were they whining about? The problems you all face on a regular basis. They're whining about the stuff that happens in our industry on a regular basis, and they wanted to do something about it. And I've given you all of this as background because I really want you to understand it's not what you do. It's how you think about it. When you think about it, you'll change your actions. And I'm really passionate about this, obviously, because I go to companies and I'll start with them and they'll say, Bob, we're doing this stuff over here and they're calling that waterfall. So Bob, can you tell us how we can do those same things, call them different words and say we're doing Scrum? Like, what's up with this, right? So you have to change the way you think or it's not going to work. Now, so what? What's the big deal here? Well, here's the important part. Some people dream of success while others wake up and work hard to do it. Doing this takes deliberate practice. It's very difficult to do well. The phrase is, Scrum is simple, but not easy, right? And the same is true of anything we try to do in life. It's kind of simple, most of the stuff we try to do, but it's not easy, okay? It takes discipline to do it. Another thing, discipline means doing what needs to be done even when you don't want to. Right? And that's, it kind of gets to character a little bit. Character is who you are when nobody's looking, right? That phrase. Discipline says, we're going to do the right thing no matter what. Now, how many of you, this is a rhetorical question, so you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you really work at a company that will do the right thing no matter what? It's pretty rare. It's rare, right? So, of course, the ultimate people are all like that. But this is hard. It's hard work. Now, I want to hear a little of your story, but I want to do it this way. How am I doing on time? We're doing good. I want you to turn to a few people near you. Form groups of 3, 4, 5, whatever you can in the chairs that you have with the limited mobility we've got. And I want you to share a little bit of what your story is. How is your company doing in terms of valuing agility? Maybe you're not at all. Maybe you saw some things up here and you want to cry and leave the room. Whatever it is, I want you to talk to a few people near you and share a little bit of your stories. I'll just give you like 5 minutes. Just share some information with the people near you. Let's see what happens. When teams are behind schedule, about 70% of the time, it's external forces that cause that. And those are controllable. We just choose not to control them. We can do a little bit better than that. Next one. Use examples to describe behavior. Right? You want to use examples to describe behavior. Sometimes behavior is very simple and the example is simple, but sometimes behavior, have you ever had that project that started out simple and got really complex? Like this guy. A guy's singing. No big deal. Well, you know what? It turned out that when we examined what he was doing, he was actually singing while juggling. That got a little harder. Oh, and by the way, there's a machete involved. That got a little harder. Oh, and he's doing it all while riding a unicycle. Right? Right? We want to make sure that we're using examples, because when we use examples, we generally find those simple things aren't so simple anymore. I put this up here because basically what I'm talking about is behavior-driven development. Behavior-driven development specifies by example. If you're not familiar with it, look up the term. And if you are familiar with it, start using the tool Cucumber or something like it. Make your testing expose these scenarios, because most teams would say, hey, we built a guy that was singing, that's what you asked for. Oh no, it's obvious we wanted to sing while juggling, and then you build that. Oh no, it's obvious we wanted to do that with a machete while riding a unicycle. Isn't that obvious to everybody? Right? So that's the kind of world we get into, and we need to get away from that world by specifying by example. Here's one of the phrases I really like to hear teams use. Let's say we're back here, this guy is singing. And let's imagine that you asked me for a guy singing. And I'm not sure I know what you really mean, because I could see this being kind of complex. The question I would ask is, hey, if I built this guy that's singing, how would you know I successfully completed it? And your answer would be, well, he's singing while juggling with a machete on a unicycle. You'd give me back the acceptance criteria, you'd give me back those scenarios that I could use. So don't talk to people like they're a used car salesman. Did you mean this or did you mean that? What about this option? What about that feature? Just ask them point blank. How will you know we've finished it? What will you do? And the answer they give you back are your scenarios. Number 3, split work into very thin vertical slices. You've probably all seen this picture in a class. Basically, you want user stories and product backlog items to be slices of value. And here's the reason. You are not compensated for the work you do. You're compensated for what? The value you deliver. Does a data model deliver any value by itself? No. How about an object model? How about a user interface? No, you need to slice through all of them to deliver value. And by the way, again, one person probably doesn't do all of this. You have several people involved, and that's how you create value, is working together. So we try to make sure that we have vertical slices, and I understand it's really, really hard. But we're going to do it even when that vertical slice has to be really, really thin. Because we're going to make sure we understand what it is we're building by building those thin slices. They're going to be used for educating ourselves. They're going to be used for educating the user. And by the way, let's go back to this picture for a second. Does the user gain any knowledge by you showing them the data model? No. When do they gain knowledge? When you show it to them this way. Is it possible that you could show them a vertical slice and they could say, oh, that's not at all what I expected, you're doing the wrong thing? Yeah, and that's why you want these slices to be thin. The thinner they are, the faster you learn that. Right? If you build an entire feature, a big fat feature, and you show it to them and they say, not so good. Build a little tiny slice, take 1/10 the time and show it to them, and they go, and you say, okay, throw it away, start again. Right? I like to call it making little bets over big bets. You can live a lot longer if you make a lot more little bets. Big bets, you might as well go to Las Vegas and put it all on red or black. And by the way, no matter what you pick, it'll come up green. Right? So be real careful. Number 2, look for and maintain options. One of the things that we're really good at in the software world is closing off options. We tend to close off options pretty quickly. We actually want to leave them open for as long as possible because we don't know the right answer. Only close them when you have to, the last responsible moment, because the more choice you have, the more opportunity you have to make a better choice. And this is true even when a choice seems obvious, like this one. For this group, that might not be so obvious, so maybe this one. All right, that one might not be obvious either, so how about this one? Right? We have to make choices around what we're going to do. I put this one up, unthinking to myself, at Dell. I'm like, uh-oh. And I put this one up in Atlanta, and they're like, oh yeah, of course the choice is Coke. I put it up in Denver, of course the choice is Pepsi. Right? So I end up with good and evil, and hopefully we mostly pick the good side. But you have to keep your choices open as long as you can. The more you can keep the choices open, the more likely you can create a great result. Okay? Choice equals opportunity for success. And number 1, relentlessly focus on delivering customer value. And I mean be relentless about it. Teams that are high-performing teams care about nothing else. When somebody comes to them and says, can you do this for me? Their first question, what do you think it is? What's the value? Is that more important than anything we're building right now? Well, no. Good. Get out of here. Right? They relentlessly focus on delivering maximum value to their customer all the time. Their mantra is maximum value over time. And nothing distracts them from that. Because at the end of the day, the more value they deliver, the happier the customer. The happier the customer, the more money the customer spends. The more money the customer spends, the more profitable the company. The more profitable the company, the more it comes back to that person, right, or that team. Because eventually that's a cycle that feeds itself. And I know a lot of you don't believe it, but if your company is more successful, theoretically that will equal more for you in many, many cases. You don't see that today because your company is going along at a status quo that's here. Right? You get your salary, that's good enough. We're paying you for what you do. Well, if you start being truly successful and the company starts having more money, more discretionary income, that's a chance for them to give more of it back to you, and most of them will. But you have to deliver value. Now let's talk about value for a minute. What percentage of a typical project do you think turns out to be rarely or never used by the customer? What would you guess? 40? Yeah, it's like 65%, 64%. 45% gets never used, and 19% is rarely used. So only 36% of most projects is actually valuable. Now, think about what I said earlier. Why would that occur? Give me some ideas. What did I say product owners never do? They never talk to the customer. Does it surprise you that more than half of what we build doesn't apply to them? Right? So we have to make sure that we're relentlessly focusing on value, even when we make technical improvements. There are a lot of people who say, oh, we have to do these technical user stories and we have to refactor and stuff. I'm not one of those people that says just do that, because to me that has to have value. I might look at a piece of code and say, that's ugly. But I won't say refactor it if it's working. What I will say is, next time we're in that area, refactor it, because now it's worthwhile. But ugliness does not equal not working, right? And so we have to always understand it's about value for the customer. If the refactoring adds value, for example, if we refactor that code, instead of supporting 10 users, we can support 50, well, now it might be worth it. But if it's just refactoring because people are tired of looking at it, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. And that's what these teams do. They make sure that whenever they have anything technical they're doing, there's a valid customer-facing reason for doing that. And too often we fall into the trap of not having that happen. Like, ooh, cool new tool, let's try it. Well, that's great if it helps your customer. But if not, how about we build something of value? One of the ways so teams that do this, one of the ways I tell them to think is, imagine for a moment that at the end of the sprint, your money runs out. And if you deliver something good enough, your company will give you more money for the next sprint. Would you approach your projects differently under those circumstances? What would you be focusing on now? Value, right? Value, value, value. If I don't have enough value in a sprint, my project's done, I'm fired. But if I have enough value in the sprint, I get money for the next sprint. And it's an extreme analogy, but it gets the point across. Because the minute you stop focusing on value is the minute your customer stops caring. And if your customer stops caring, what's going to happen to your company? Down the toilet, right? So we want to make sure we take care of all this. Now there's one other thing we want to make sure we do too. All 7 disciplines allow you to do this.
No!
They all say you can say no. And that's a really important aspect, because if you can't say this,
No!
you're never going to be a high-performing team. It can't possibly happen. High-performing teams use this button a lot
No! No! No!
because it's a conversation starter, right? Why do we not say no enough today? Need some reasons. Fear. Intimidation. So what we hear is we think if we say no, that it's a career ender, right? In a healthy environment, when you say no,
For the last time, no!
it's a conversation starter. It's not a conversation ender, right? You can't just say no. Don't ask me. Don't, no. That's a conversation ender, and you're going to get fired. You can say no, and here's why, and let's start a conversation. It's a good conversation starter, but it's not a conversation ender, okay? Remember, this is all about people. Not a single thing I spoke about has anything to do except about people. Value, thinking differently, treating people differently, expecting things to be different. At the end of the day, it is all about people. It's not about process, it's not about framework, it's not about any of that. And by the way, all 7 of these disciplines are useful no matter what environment you're in. Let's go back through them a little bit. Let's go back to discipline number 7. Even if you were on a waterfall project, might it help you get done faster if people didn't pay attention to their roles but work based on their skills? Wouldn't that help? Go to the next one. Coordinate tasks. Coordinate using tasks rather than apply them across the board and make them be predictions. Wouldn't that help even in a waterfall environment to coordinate our work? Good. Making progress visible to everybody. Wouldn't that help even in a waterfall environment, right? So in a waterfall environment, people sometimes think they're making their status visible, and they use these nice red, yellow, green dashboards. Anybody here have red, yellow, green dashboards? I call them the green until they turn infinitely red dashboards, right? That's not being very open and honest. That's not really showing everything to everybody. So if you did that, might you find out earlier that things were a little busted? I didn't do that, I don't think.
That's fine.
That would be a real powerful clicker if I did.
There's a timer at 8 that turns everything.
Oh, it's a timer at 8. Okay, it's time to go home. I got it. What about discipline 4? Using examples to describe behavior. Wouldn't that help developers write better software? Right? We know exactly what the software is supposed to do. Let's make it behave that way. Number 3, split work into thin slices, right? Find a small, when you don't understand something, write a little piece of it, get some feedback on it, make sure we're building the right thing. Maintain options. In a waterfall world, maintaining options is great because we're not going to find out till the end whether we got it right or wrong. So the more options we keep open, the better chance we've got. Focus on delivering value. Imagine your waterfall projects, instead of going in random order through your requirements, or in the order that most developers would do them, which is the cool stuff, the fancy stuff, the easy stuff, oh, and then there's the stuff anybody cares about. Right? Instead of doing that order, let's focus on delivering that valuable stuff first when we build better products. Right? So all of this can be used no matter what environment you're in, which is why I like it. And I want to take it a step further now. Earlier, you discussed a little bit about your environments, and I want you to take a few minutes now, form your small groups again, and I want you to say to each other one thing you've learned tonight that you're going to take into the workplace and how you're going to use it. Okay, so I want you to take something away from you tonight, explain it to somebody else, and explain how you're going to use it. So I'll give you another 5 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll wrap up. So 5 minutes to talk to people near you. How are you going to use some of what you learned tonight? Okay. A couple people. Who wants to share? Give me some ideas about what you're going to do differently. Yeah.
So I liked what you were saying about value, and at the end of the sprint, if, delivering value. I work with 6 or 7 product owners, and they don't necessarily focus on value. That's one of our problems. So I'm going to go back to them and say, imagine at the end of this next week that your funding is cut. And a couple of them are in that situation.
Right.
What would deliver the most value for your customer?
Right. And what are we going to deliver this that keeps us
Yeah.
in business?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me another one. Who else wants to share?
Finance is gonna love that one.
Who else is going to share? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to share that the no for me it's very challenging, especially when you work with different type of customer and business unit. Like I work in government and I deal with law enforcement and all of that. Imagine saying to the chief of police no or something, Like,
Government.
So the bottom line is that
Government is not agile.
well, you'll be surprised. But anyway, you have to find the elegant way of saying no.
Well, I'm
And
going to
like-
give you some help. Here you go. You're very own.
There you go.
You're welcome. Who else wants to share? Give me another one. Yeah.
Throwing out the business cards.
Throwing out the business cards, right? I'm going to throw a business card to you. But it's not really a business card. I'm going to give one to you too. $25 Amazon card for speaking up in public. There are studies that say more people are afraid of speaking in public than dying. So we got to honor those that are willing to speak up in public, right? So a lot of things that you can take back to your companies from this. And I really challenge you to say, what is it going to take to get us to the next level? Maybe focus on 1 or 2 of these that you think you're not doing that you can do and just get started on it. I think it'll make a big difference for you. But at this point, I want to open it up to questions. So fire away, I'm here. Yeah.
I'd like and this is not a trick question, can you define value? Because I come from like a Lean Six Sigma background, and
Right.
can you define value? It's not a trick question, just.
Well, it is, but it isn't. I
Okay.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for my purposes, how about I do this, since she's a Lean Six Sigma person.
Well, no, I mean, I'm saying I'm
value is anything
recovering
that's
from
not
that.
waste.
I know, but I'm saying like,
Recovering from-
no, really, because like in Lean Six Sigma, they talk about,
Right.
minimize waste, da,
Right.
da, da, da. But I don't,
So
I'm
for
the same
me,
way. It's all
the
people.
value that we
Yeah.
don't focus enough on is customer-centric value. However, there is value to be gained by savings internally, but I think those should primarily be secondary because we have enough talk about that. We don't have enough talk about the outside the building value.
But I mean, it's the end customer, because sometimes you
Right.
can have a customer, but then you've really got your end customer down.
Right, so-
Sometimes they don't go far enough.
Right,
in
so the
terms of where
value is to
value
the
is
ultimate user.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take that customer phrase out. Customer is the one who buys, users is the one who uses. The user has value. The customer has cost. Right? And so we want to be real careful about the words we use. I want to focus on the end user, the one who's going to touch it, feel it, do something with it. Sometimes that user is internal, and now other times we can also have internal value through the savings we can generate, but that tends to be less than the external value we can deliver if we focus on it, because there's so much out there to get. Right? It's so easy. As a friend of mine says, get a group of users in the room and ask them the question, what can we do that will deliver value, and you'll just never stop taking notes. Right? It's just going to be a forever list. Yeah.
So, like when Apple developed their products, and they really don't go out asking customers what they want. They have a vision, and it's entirely internal. And can you define value? And also, she didn't get a card.
You know, There's
You're
intrinsic
hoping that they
value
get one.
and then there's expectation. I don't want to set the expectation that everybody gets it.
Wait till she starts using
It's just
that
the
no
first
button,
two.
Rafael.
So,
Wait till she starts using that no button.
So to get to your point, which I forgot what your question was. Apple. So Apple doesn't ask people what they want. You're right. But I'm also going to make another provocative statement. Earlier I said you don't get paid for work, you should get paid for value. Here's another one. Never, ever, ever build what the customer wants. Never. What should you build? What they need, right? So think about Henry Ford. What's his favorite quote? If I were to ask the customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. What did they need? To go faster. So he built a car. My assertion is Apple does the same thing. It doesn't build what people want. It meets their needs in a different way. And now that makes another point, though, about features. Right? How many people here have iPhones? How many people here have Android phones? So about 50-50. Of those two types of phones, which one makes more dollars per unit for the company that sells them? The iPhone. Which one sells more? Android. Which one has more features? Android by far, and yet which one does the world primarily consider the more sexy phone? iPhone, right? It's not it's not more features wins, right? It's the right features win.
That's right.
The right features presented in the right way is the way you win, and you do that by meeting customers' needs, not by doing what they want, right? So Android has said, we're going to build everything anybody wants. We're going to throw it in there and see who uses it. And Apple says, we're primarily going to meet needs by giving features that people need to meet those needs. But that's their basis. That's their big difference.
That goes to the point that we were discussing on the amount of features that are used. That you throw out a 60%. In our case, in my company, we see as high as 90% of the features not used. That means that much is thrown away from our effort.
Yeah. And one of the ways we get into that is that's us doing it to ourselves primarily, and I'll give you a little insight into that. That generally happens when you have technical people making decisions around what you should build. Because one of the things I know, I can make fun of developers because I are one, but I know how to tell the difference between a good developer and a bad developer. Given the choice between A and B, which one should I do? The good developer will ask themselves the question, which one does the customer really want? And then they'll make the wrong choice. But they'll at least ask the question, and they'll make the wrong choice because they're going to pick the cool stuff and not the stuff that's really meaningful and meets a need. So I would focus on, do we have the right people doing the job, and are they asking the right people the right questions? Because that's primarily how you get into a skew that's that big. Yeah.
So I have a question. This is probably outside of the realm of Scrum.
That's okay, I'm here.
It's free. So I'm working with a group that's really considered DevOps, and they are struggling with Scrum because it just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So how do you apply this? Because a lot of times you don't necessarily have a product owner per se where you can go to and say, what do they need? It's a matter of, I've got an emergency fix, I've got IE11, I've got to roll out, what do I need to do?
I think Scrum in DevOps is really difficult. Scrum is more for work that can be scheduled. I would look more at a Kanban approach. Now, I would be careful with the Kanban approach, and I would say, do we actually have the ability to order our work in the most meaningful way? Or are we going to simply switch states a lot? Because Kanban, the thing that misses for me, and some of you that are Kanban maniacs may disagree with me, but from my perspective, Kanban misses the discipline of getting things done. It's implied in what you're doing because you're measuring cycle time and stuff, but it's not explicit. In Scrum, explicitly at the end of a sprint, you're done. And so if you're missing that discipline, Kanban will not help. But a Kanban with that discipline can probably help your organization there.
I'm recommending it to them to try Scrumban and try to take the discipline from Scrum and apply it to some of the Kanban.
Exactly. What else? Got time for a couple more before I have to wrap up. Yeah.
You mentioned culture, and it's huge in my experience. So how do you influence culture in an organization?
So I've done a lot of reading around culture, and basically what it boils down to is culture is a result of all of your previous results. Right? Your culture didn't start where it is today, it started somewhere else, and the results you got along the way formed your culture. So if results form your culture, what do you have to change your culture? Your results, right? So you have to start small and start having wins and proving that you can win, and then start changing your culture through a culture of success. One more. Yeah.
So I understand about the coordination versus estimate. That makes sense. And it's actually a good thing. But what happens when you have a deadline in an organization with part of the company is still doing waterfall and all PMO and all that, and they want to know, I want it done so this particular time.
So how do you deliver on deadlines and things like that? How's that been working for you, by the way? Not as good as it could, right? So the thing you have to remember about estimates is they're not working for us today. Let's get that out of our heads. They're not working for us today. So anything we could do could be better, right? Because I pretty much believe we can't do any worse, right? Most of you wouldn't be here if you were in a perfect world and delivering on time, right? So we can't do any worse. So how do we get better? We get better by saying, let's estimate the right things at the right level. Let's estimate at the high level, give ourselves a forecast of what we can finish, and then from that, let's modify our scope along the way as we learn to meet that date. So one of the things you have to remember is you can shoot for date or you can shoot for scope. You got a choice. If you're shooting for both of them, you've lost. You can't deliver that. The only way, so scope I can deliver, date I can deliver if I can modify scope. If I'm forced to deliver both, the only thing I can change is quality. And what's going to happen to quality? It's not a choice you want to have to make. So you have to decide which is more important, that I get all the scope or that I deliver on a date. Most people today are date driven. Now there are some things that have to be done by date. For example, a legislation happened, we have to do it by date X. Well, that's great. They usually give you plenty of notice. Let's make sure that's the first thing we put into our next release and not the last thing, right? Because it's important. It's a game ender if we don't do it. I have one company, they're part of the electrical power grid. Literally, if they don't do the FERC standards by the dates that they're supposed to do them, it's $1 million a day fine. I mean, in this company, their development team costs $1 million a year, right? They're not going to want to pay $1 million a day for missing a date. Right? So they do those things early, and they say they're in place. You know, we got a year. We don't have to worry about it. Okay. I enjoyed my time with you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I have one other question. So actually, I have a series of questions. Raise your hand if you are not a certified product owner but would like to be one. Raise your hand if you're not a certified product owner but would like to be one. Keep your hand up if you could take Thursday and Friday this week off and come to my class. So I got 1, 2, just 2 of you? 3? So 3 of you. Okay, each of you pick a random number between 1 and 50. 27.
35.
35.
Oh, there's one more.
You missed one more here.
Okay. Huh? 36. Over here? Between 1 and 50. 40. So 20 something was the lowest, right?
Joy wants to pick a number like that.
Too late, sorry. 26. So you can show up Thursday, Friday?
Yeah, I can make that happen.
Okay, so email me tonight. I'll send you details. Sign up for my class Thursday and Friday. Just show up. It's free. Okay?